Craig's family was apparently very aware of this and believed it, claiming to have witnessed numerous bizarre occurrences over the years, all of which happened whenever Craig was around. Honestly, I didn't believe this for a second, not at all. And because I didn't believe it, it felt like a bit of a red flag. I mean, why would he make up something so random and bizarre and share it with me? So out of the blue when nothing had warranted it, but being in my early 20s at the time, I just chose to ignore it. Because he was great and seemed so normal. Otherwise, I suppose I eventually chose to believe that he genuinely believed it, which was preferable to the idea that he would maintain such a lie for so long, just to unsettle me. Still, I pulled it down, Scully, and reasoned that all the strange events that he had experienced throughout his life must have had reasonable explanations. Now, one night Craig was staying over at my place. This was actually the first time that we'd ever spent an entire night. Together we talked, made future plans, made out, and listened to music before we knew it. It was 2 in the morning, and this was around the time that something really strange happened. We were both sitting on the floor of my bedroom, backs against the far wall opposite my bedroom door, looking for music videos to watch on my laptop, when 3 loud, fast knocks came from the door. I was so startled because it was extremely late, and the only other person present in the house at that time was my mom, who had gone to sleep hours ago and only ever got up to use the bathroom. She certainly never knocked on my door at such a late hour. Especially if I had company over, I silently listened. If I'd imagined the knocks, because it was late, and I was feeling pretty tired, but no, because when I had looked over at Craig, he was also looking at the door. This is the part where I imagine that a lot of listeners will probably decide that this story is fake, but hey, I'm going to stay true to my experience. So here it goes. So right before I'm about to call out to my mom, I hear a very angry male voice call my name, similar to how an angry father might shout at their child for breaking something valuable. It took Craig and several minutes to finally muster up the courage to stand and creep over to the door. Before that, we comically stayed pressed against the wall, silently staring at the door and occasionally glancing at each other. I pressed my ear against the door and didn't hear anything, so I eventually opened it, but not before retrieving a golf club from my closet, and saw nothing, just a normal dark hallway. Craig and I proceeded to check every spot in the house, even opening closet doors, and in the end we found nothing while we did. This, though, I remember feeling like eyes were burning into me, as if someone was angrily watching and judging my every move. It had given me goosebumps, but because we didn't find anyone, I shrugged away that feeling when Craig and I finally got into bed shortly after. I expressed feeling very creeped out naturally. Craig, though, nonchalantly replied something to the effect of, "I told you I have a spirit that follows me round." I had been really unnerved by this reply. He had said it a little too matter-of-factly for my liking anyway. Fast forward several weeks, when Craig is sleeping over at my place again. We were hanging out in the kitchen shortly after midnight when Craig received a call from his sister. He decided to step out into the backyard for the call. It's worth noting, too, that the backyard connected to the kitchen via a large sliding glass door, so I could see him at all times, so long as I remained in the kitchen, and he stayed by that door. It's also worth noting, too, that the kitchen sink had a very large window directly above it, a window that looked out to the side of the house. I mentioned this because I decided to wash dishes while Craig took the call. While washing the dishes, I alternated between looking out the window in front of me and glancing to my right, where I could see Craig leaning against the glass door as he conversed with his sister. When I got to a particularly dirty dish, I stopped looking out of the window and to my right so I could focus on getting the dish clean. When I achieved this, I looked back at the window and immediately took a couple of steps back, because standing right outside of the window was Craig, who was now smiling at me. And I don't mean an ordinary smile. I'm talking a highly exaggerated grin with lots of teeth, showing eyes blown wide. Open if you've seen the recent horror movie Smile then. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It was very similar to that. After I collected myself, I laughed and shook my head at Craig before gesturing at him to knock it off and come back inside. But he stayed completely motionless, eyes still burning into mine, his grin never faltering. He didn't even blink after another 10 seconds or so went by. I began to feel very unsettled by this, mind you. I had still been under the impression that he was just trying to make me feel uncomfortable via his version of a joke, so I was mostly unnerved that he would commit to the gag for so long more than anything else. I guess I certainly didn't consider it could be anything else even after the previous incident, and out of nowhere, while I was still looking directly at Craig through the window, I heard the sliding glass door open to my right when this happened. I looked away from the window and saw Craig coming back inside from the backyard when I looked back at the window. The smiling Craig was now gone now. I want to make it crystal clear. Unless Craig had secret teleportation powers I didn't know about, there was just no way that he could have moved from the window to the sliding glass door. While I was staring right at him like that it would have been impossible, when I told Craig what I had just experienced, he said, "I believe you, something like that has happened before." Craig just grabbed my hand, handed me to my bedroom, and I felt eyes burning into my back the whole way there up, until Craig shut my bedroom door. That is, but even then, after we got into bed, I could still sense something standing on the other side of that door. We split up not long after this due to something unrelated, believe it or not, too. Nothing strange has ever happened since, almost a full decade later, and I haven't experienced anything. I never feel like I'm being watched, nor have I seen anything strange, but if you've listened this far, then thanks, and I would love to get some thoughts. I've had other bizarre experiences, all of which occurred prior to meeting Craig, but nothing that was ever so blatant. I guess I'll admit that I'm still somewhat of a skeptic, but whenever I try to come up with a reasonable explanation for the experiences that I just mentioned, I always come up empty. I typically forget about these encounters, but this time of the year naturally brings the memories back, I guess, even though they happened at a completely different time of the year. In any case, if you do have some thoughts, then please share them in the comments. Music below. When I, female and 33, was 20 years old, not too long after the 2007 housing crash. My family and I moved into a house in Martins Ferry, Ohio. It previously was a duplex that was converted into one sort of large house. It had 2 floors, 6 bedrooms, 4 on the second floor, 2 on the ground floor, 1 bathroom right next to my bedroom, and a very short basement. I couldn't stand up straight in it. And I'm 5'9". So I lived there with my 2 older brothers, A and E, 22 and 21, and little sister, age 13. Our rooms were on the second floor, as well as my mother and my stepfather, 52 and 45, respectively. I also have an older sister, D, 27. Now, I didn't come from a great home life, and eventually my stepfather was put in jail for DUIs and driving without a license. Everything was fine when we moved in, though, but we all had previously experienced paranormal activity in other homes that we lived in. This wasn't something unusual or frightening, because we lived in an oldish city anyway. Other than seeing, hearing, smelling some weird things, nothing was outstandingly frightening. Dee lived with her husband at the time, along with their 2 small children. Her husband was financially abusive and was also an addict who got Dee addicted as well. And one day Dee called me crying because her husband had spent all of her money on drugs, left her car on empty, and had left her alone at home with the children, and they had no food to eat. He spoke with my mother, and we came up with a game plan to get my sister out. I advised her to pack up everything she could fit in the car, pack up the kids, and meet me at The gas station. She lived a short 20-minute drive away across the river, and I met her at the gas station. And while I filled her car with gas, I hugged her as she cried. I bought her a pack of smokes, and we both drove back to the house. What we didn't know was that Dee was just starting into the worst few years of her addiction. And due to all of the negative energy, something dark seemed to have attached to her. As well, the first thing that I remember was just how dreary the house felt after she had moved in. She eventually was fired from her job as a nurse because she had been caught stealing meds from her patients. She decided to get back with her husband, and he moved in because he couldn't afford their house payments due to spending all his money on drugs. And she also had a boyfriend that she was cheating on him with. It was a very tumultuous time because Dee is the type of person who thinks all other women are out to get her and steal her man. So she assumed that I was trying to sleep with her husband. Because I tried to be civil around him, I was engaged to someone else at the time, mind you. And after a day full of my sister trying to physically attack me, this is when this dark thing started to materialize. So at night I would be in bed and feel like something was watching me anytime I was doing schoolwork. I felt like someone was standing behind me while I sat at my desk in my bedroom. It evolved into things in my room being moved around. When nobody else was able to get into my room, then my blankets would be pulled off in my sleep. Eventually, I started hearing someone walking around my room at night as well. Then the scratches started appearing. I would wake up with random scratches on my legs, on my back, where I couldn't reach them. And one night I was grabbed by my leg and ripped off my bed by something that I wasn't able to see. Mind you, I am not a small woman by any means. So it would take someone quite strong to yank me that hard and that fast off of my bed, in a dead weight, dead sleep like that. Another terrifying night. I heard it walk around the hallway outside of my bedroom. I lit some sage to cleanse my room, and started chanting a protection spell over and over again for nearly half an hour. My fiancé Jay, 19 at the time, called me extremely upset, telling me that something was in his house outside of his room growling, and he felt like he was going to be attacked if he left his room the next day. I went over to his house. He lived in a town that he grew up in, where my sister and my whole family lived before. We moved into this new house, and there were literal gouged scratches in his wooden door, from where whatever it was had been waiting. Apparently, I asked him if I had left anything at his house within the last few days, and I looked around and saw a watch on the windowsill by his bed. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but something was telling me that whatever this thing was, it was now fixated on me. Music. So I am a skeptical believer of these sorts of things. A doubting Thomas E. type, if you will. However, as a kid, I did used to see shadow people all the time and have heard strange things. What sounded like parents' voices calling me from downstairs, even though my parent was sitting right next to me upstairs. But when I was in college a few years back, I had a strange encounter in my dorm room. My roommate was in the room as, well, it was late and I was sleeping soundly when I randomly woke up for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I sat up, and at the foot of my bed in the pitch dark was a man. He was completely shadowy with glowing red eyes, just sitting and staring at me. I remember locking eyes with him for a split second and sort of giving a weak scream. I instantly hid under my blankets, because that will protect you from supernatural entities, right? And waited a few moments before peeking out from beneath the blankets, and he was still there staring at me. I don't remember what really happened after that, to be honest. I think I just fell back asleep with my head under the blankets. My roommate said that she didn't hear me scream or anything, so I really don't know what to think of it. Maybe hiding under the blankets does help after all. I talked to some of my friends about it though, and they said that I must have been dreaming, but I really don't think so. I mean, I felt wide awake after locking eyes with whatever that thing was. My heart was racing quickly too. But what was that thing? Was it the Hat Man that I've heard stories about? Has anyone else experienced this, or should I be concerned anyway? A few years later. This is completely unrelated. I think I was visiting an old cemetery in Richmond, VA, and came across a grave covered with evil eye necklaces, rose quartz crystals, and the like. I was intrigued and went to take a closer look. There was a jar at the foot of the grave with a picture of a lady inside and a bunch of broken mirror shards. I really don't remember if I heard the whispering before or after I noticed the jar, but I remember hearing whispering near my ear of like voices, speaking rapidly. I was alone in this part of the cemetery, but my idiot self for some reason said, "Hello, anyone there?" And the whispering got closer for some reason, and I don't really ever touch things in cemeteries. I felt really compelled to touch this jar and strangers still, despite how terrifying this situation was. I couldn't bring myself to feel afraid. My brain was screaming for me to run, but my heart and body were just perfectly calm. In fact, in the end, I sort of had to force myself to run, and it felt like I was running. In a dream, almost the grave had this sort of magnetism to it, and the air felt sort of pressurized as well. As I ran, my foot started hurting like I'd sprained it. It didn't stop hurting until I made it back to my car and eventually drove home, but my question for all of you is, what does a jar with broken mirror shards mean? I've asked my witchcraft practicing friends, and they aren't sure. They just said that the situation was bad and dangerous, and that I probably should just not go back there. But have any of you guys experienced anything like this, and what does this all mean? This happened to me when I was 4 years old. It's been 30 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. There were so many strange occurrences in this house, but this is the one that started everything. My entire family has lived in the same small SCE, Kansas town for like 4 generations now. My mother grew up there and moved away with her mother when she was around 15. A year later, she was involved in a very tragic car accident, where she was the only one who survived after waking up from a month-long coma. There was a lawsuit against the company who owned the other vehicle, and my mom won a large settlement shortly after the lawsuit. My mother was whisked back to the small Kansas town by her father. It wasn't long before my mother was back in high school, met my father, and was pregnant with me by the time she was 17. She had married my father and graduated from high school. They bounced around from small house to apartment to small house again in a town of 1,000 people. There isn't much to choose from. Eventually they got sick of the roach-filled slums, and they decided to use the money my mom had to buy a house, as with the rental side of things. Houses were somewhat tough to come by as well. Most homes are family-owned and have been for decades, but they did find one house available for sale. The house that they settled on was a large 2-story home across the street from the high school. It was built in the 1800s, when the streets in town were either dirt or brick, and as with any big creepy old house next to a high school, people talked about it, but none of my parents' friends had ever actually been inside when my mom viewed it. She found to be absolutely beautiful. She insistently spent most of her settlement on the house and purchased it in her name alone. My mom, dad, and my 3-year-old self moved in shortly after. Less than a year later, my parents divorced, and my dad moved out, though my mom and I ended up living here mostly alone for the next 9 years. I know that this is getting a bit long too, but it's important to understand the layout of the home for this, and almost all stories that happened here, so bear with me here. So you open the front door to a large staircase in the middle of the home. On the left was a small living room area.